Welcome to the Third Eye Show, which brings you ancient wisdom as well as cutting-edge investigations into the mysteries of the universe. The Third Eye Show celebrates our diversity, like the unique beauty of each individual wave, and our oneness, like the magnificent ocean from which each wave emerges. We are all one in spirit as we live on this earth plane. The third eye is said to be able to see into the spiritual and psychic realms. At a time when our lives, our country, and our planet are undergoing intense transformations, we will explore topics that will fascinate, enlighten, and empower. Join us as we witness the thrilling ways spirit manifests in our daily lives and the varied paths we choose to create heaven here on our earth. The Third Eye Show is created and offered in love and light.
Travel far and wide on today's Third Eye Show. First, we relax on a beach in the glorious, sun-drenched Bahamas, courtesy of Dana Reed's extraordinary photography, while we soak in and are enriched by the 7 keys to happiness, generously shared with us by the Third Eye's happiness guru, Doria Gambino. Next, we travel back in time to the 60s, when the search for Bridey Murphy and the discovery of pulsars were not only making headlines, but also deeply influencing the thinking and development of many young psychics, among them our own Lucia Reed. And finally, we visit enchanted and enchanting New Mexico. This is a land rife with mystery as well as history, a place of magic and uncanny beauty. And our tour guide and friend, Patty McDonald, who knows and loves this land well, will share it all with us on today's Third Eye Show. So don't touch that remote. Number 1, eat and drink the right things for your body. Your body is like a car. It needs fuel in order to run. Give it the proper fuel and you'll feel healthier and have more energy and zest for living life. Number 2, read inspirational material every morning and every evening. If you start and end each day by spending even 5 minutes inputting positive information into your mind, this information will stay with you throughout the day. And over time, this practice will retrain your mind to focus on more uplifting thoughts. Number 3, meditate. It has many, many benefits. Research has shown that meditating regularly can improve physical health by strengthening the immune system, lowering stress, lowering blood pressure, and more. The mental and emotional benefits include increased serenity and clarity, and the spiritual benefits. Your intuition becomes enhanced and you become more cosmically connected. Number 4, visualize with enthusiasm the life you want to live. Always, always, always remember that your thoughts and feelings are creating your reality. What you imagine strongly and vividly today will become your tomorrow. So be sure to to create mental pictures that reflect the best life you can imagine. Number 5, do something every day that brings you joy. Call your best friend. Take a walk. Put on your favorite song and dance around the house. Read jokes on the internet. Take a bubble bath. Play fetch with your dog. Do a crossword puzzle. Whatever puts a smile on your face. A day without joy is a dull and dreary day indeed. Number 6, pray every day for the success and well-being of others. When you send good wishes out to others, you expand your own inner sense of happiness out into the world. Remember the saying, what goes around comes around? Send out positive and loving thoughts, and this is what will circle back into your own life. And number 7, spend time each day in gratitude. What good is having nice things in your life if you don't bother to acknowledge or appreciate them? When you take the time to delight in and give thanks for all that you have, you will discover that every day of your life is chock full of wonderful little gifts from the universe. I was raised in a quite unconventional household. I am a second-generation psychic. My mother was psychic. And my mother had a meditation group. She took classes in developing her psychic ability. She gave readings professionally. She helped clear, helped spirits pass to the other side, helped with so-called hauntings, and so on, and had a lifelong interest in the paranormal. So I thought I would share with you some of the researchers, some of the events that really were important to me when I was developing my psychic abilities and learning about the paranormal when I was young. I thought some of these might function as markers for people who are just getting interested in psychic phenomena today. And also, I thought this might sort of stimulate some thought and conversation among people as to what are pointers for you? What are your markers along the way? Where are you receiving guidance and inspiration on your path, on your spiritual path? Who's helping you? And maybe you can share some of those insights with others. So I'm going to share a few of mine with you. One of the first things that I remember was the search for Bridey Murphy. Now, I'll tell you, I'm 55 years old, so I might as well tell you that right now, because you're going to be hearing dates like 1956 and 1962, and so let's just get it right out there. Okay, so the search for Bridey Murphy was first published in 1956. So a lot of you probably have no idea who that is, or maybe you've just heard some stories about who Bridey Murphy was. Well, Bridey Murphy, the search for Bridey Murphy caused enormous excitement in my household. My mother and her friends were fascinated by this story and couldn't get enough of it. Here's the background. In 1952, Colorado businessman and amateur hypnotist Maury Bernstein put housewife Virginia Teague of Pueblo, Colorado, in a trance. He was apparently, if I remember the story correctly, he was just hypnotizing people for fun. You know, friends got together at somebody's house and he said, let's try it. So they were hypnotizing for fun. Okay. As he put this woman, Virginia Teague, into a trance, she suddenly started talking with an Irish brogue and talked about being another person. And you can imagine everybody was just
astonished. Now, this is 1956. People are just astonished at this, and they've never seen anything like this. They don't know what to make of it. They ended up doing a series of sessions of what amounts to a past life recall, in which this housewife, Virginia Teague, whom Maury Bernstein called Ruth Simmons at the time to protect her identity. So if you're thinking, gee, wasn't that Ruth Simmons? Yeah, it was, but it was Virginia Teague as well. And all sorts of revelations came out. Well, this series of regressions was made into an LP, into a long-playing record, and became available. My mom, of course, had a copy of this. Her friends listened to it. I listened to it. It was just the most amazing thing at the time. And then he came out, Maury Bernstein came out with a book called The Search for Bridey Murphy. And a lot of people said, this guy's just cashing in. This is just a bunch of baloney. A lot of people thought it was real. I don't really know whether it really was a past life memory or not. I mean, personally, I have no doubt whatsoever that we live many, many lifetimes. Whether Virginia Teague was remembering a lifetime as Bridey Murphy, that I don't know. But here's the story. She tells a story of, let's see, her rambling tale began in 1806 when Bridey was 8 years old and living in a house in Cork, Ireland. She was the daughter of Duncan Murphy, a barrister, a lawyer, and his wife, Kathleen. At the age of 17, she married lawyer Sean Bryan McCarthy and moved to Belfast, way up in the north. Bridey told of a fall that caused her death and of watching her own funeral, describing her tombstone and the state of being in the afterlife, the life after death. It was, she recalled, a feeling of neither pain nor happiness. She was reborn in America, although Bridey was not clear how this event happened. Virginia Teague herself was born in the Midwest in 1923, had never been to Ireland, did not speak with even the slightest hint of an Irish accent. So I remember when this story broke, we avidly listened to the recordings and wondered, could this really be true? I remember some researchers went to Ireland, did a cursory look at some of the names that the woman gave and so on, the street she lived on and so on, and said, oh, it was a bunch of baloney. It turned out later, I heard that the name she gave for the street was actually the nickname. It wasn't the actual name that you would find in the documents of the time, but it was the nickname that the common folk called the street, so that actually strengthened the claim. I later heard that the name Bridey Murphy was a neighbor who had lived in Virginia Teague or Ruth Simmons' neighborhood as a child, and that she had somehow just picked up on this and incorporated this into a fantasy. Now, I don't know the validity of that, but the Bridey Murphy story is really an interesting one. The book is called The Search for Bridey Murphy. It was written by Maury Bernstein. The first publication date is 1956, and I'm sure you can go online and find this. A simple search will bring it right up. And it's a really fascinating story. There probably have been follow-ups to this. You know, was it real, was it not, and so on. But it's a very interesting story, and it certainly was a sensation in my household. I'll tell you that. There was another phenomenon that now, at least in sort of metaphysical circles, is fairly everyday, and that is the phenomenon of Kirlian photography, or aura cameras. Back in, actually, Kirlian photography was invented in 1939 in Russia, I believe, by Semyon and Valentina Kirlian. Okay. This is a technique that records the aura of the person. It actually records your prana aura, I guess, your earthly, the closest aura to you. Let's see. I do have an explanation here. Kirlian photography is a way of representing the energy of the body in visual form. That's it. Okay, since discovered by inventors Semyon and Valentina Kirlian in 1939, the technique has been researched and refined by independent labs and health practitioners throughout the globe. Any object can be photographed. Food and supplements can be photographed to analyze vitality. Seeds can be sorted as viable or not by the size of their corona. Properties of plants and medicines can be researched. Metals will show flaws not otherwise apparent. And what really was mind-boggling to me as a kid was seeing photographs of plants. I remember a plant, a leaf, that had been photographed whole. They took the Kirlian photograph of it, and you saw the corona, the light around the leaf, and then they ripped the leaf in half and took a picture, another picture of it, and it still showed the full image of the leaf, sort of strengthening the idea that our prana aura, or our spirit body, our etheric body, is not affected by changes to our physical body. In other words, you could lose an arm and it would show up in your aura photography, which I thought was very, very interesting. To us at the time, I remember this was also absolutely sensational. And all of these things, the Bridey Murphy story about reincarnation, the Kirlian photography, which at the time we really were convinced proved the existence of an etheric body, which of course now at this age I certainly don't doubt, sort of kick-started for me as a child all sorts of worlds of wonder and worlds of thought. This is interesting. An experiment advanced as evidence of energy fields generated by living entities involves taking Kirlian contact photographs, or aura photos, of a picked leaf at set periods, its gradual withering being said to correspond with a decline in the strength of the aura. It's interesting, isn't it? You can also monitor changes over time. If you were to take an aura photo of someone and then perform a healing session and take another photo of the person after the healing session, you could sort of gauge the efficacy of the healing session, which is fascinating. In 1960, a book was published that was, for me, absolutely life-changing. This was a book published by the University of Virginia Press, and it was written by a Dr. Ian Stevenson, who actually died in February of '07. So he just passed a spirit not long ago. His book was called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. Now, Ian Stevenson was a scientist. He was the founder of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Very prestigious university, a very prestigious scientist. The only problem with his book, The 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, was that he wrote it as a scientist, and so it really didn't speak to the public. Most people, I think, just didn't want to invest the kind of energy it would take to follow the stories as written by Dr. Stevenson. Later, he did work with writers. He has several other books out that he wrote with writers, and these were written in a more public-friendly way, so that everybody could really understand and enjoy the stories and really get what he was doing. He studied, well, the Division of Perceptual Studies, formerly the Division of Personality Studies, is a unit of the Department of Psychiatric Medicine at the University of Virginia. Utilizing scientific methods, they investigate apparent paranormal phenomena, especially children who claim to remember previous lives, reincarnation. This, I believe, was Dr. Stevenson's main interest. Near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, apparitions and after-death communications, and deathbed visions, which so many people, I think almost everybody has. Dr. Stevenson studied children who claimed to remember previous lives. There's a book called Old Souls, which Dr. Stevenson co-authored with with a journalist. But that book is written in a way that is really accessible, and there are some incredible case studies in that book that I think is well worth investigating. So if you have an interest in past life memories, particularly children's past life memories, written really from a scientific, not sensationalized point of view, read 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation or Old Souls. Wonderful book. At the time this book came out, for me, it was just the most amazing thing, because I guess at that age I needed proof, or it was important to me to get that validation that, yeah, even science says it's so. I'm a little older than that now. But at the time, that was really important to me. And let me say that as a psychic child, I did have to suffer through quite a bit of teasing. I was indiscreet enough to let my classmates know that I could see auras and so on, and that occasioned quite a bit of not always good-natured ribbing. So it wasn't so easy to be a psychic child. Now they're calling crystal children and writing books about them, and it's all great. But back when I was experiencing this, it was not always so much fun to be known as a psychic child. So that scientific validation was more important to me then than perhaps it would be to a child today. But anyway, if you're interested in that study, I think Ian Stevenson is probably the best researcher to read. Moving along, there was an event that happened in 1967 that really had us all holding our breath. I remember my mother and her friends were just on the phone about this and excited about this, and we couldn't believe it. It turned out we shouldn't have believed it because it wasn't so. It wasn't what we thought. But I'm talking about the discovery of pulsars. Now, pulsars are rotating neutron stars which emit detectable electromagnetic radiation in the form of radio waves. Now, they call this the lighthouse. There's a lighthouse effect, they call it, because it emits the radiation at a regular interval. At the time, in 1967, the scientists were detecting the radiation at a regular interval, and they were saying, this can't be a natural phenomenon. This must be a message coming from extraterrestrials. As a matter of fact, the scientists who first discovered the pulsars on August 6th of 1967, Jocelyn Bell Burnell and Anthony Hewish of the University of Cambridge, UK, dubbed their discovery LGM-1 for Little Green Men. Okay. Astrophysicist Peter A. Sturrock writes that when the first, this is a quote, when the first regular radio signals from pulsars were discovered, the Cambridge scientists seriously considered that they might have come from an extraterrestrial civilization. Let me stop there and say, I remember that being said on the radio. We may have just started receiving messages, extraterrestrial messages, and this was just mind-blowing. I was so excited by this. I thought, here we are, here's the age of Aquarius, beginning right here, right now, and I'm seeing it happen. However, back to the quote, they debated this possibility and decided that, listen to this, if this proved to be correct, they could not make an announcement without checking with higher authorities. There was even some discussion about whether it might be in the best interests of mankind to destroy the evidence and forget it. That point became moot because they found out that it was a natural phenomenon. This pulsar is a neutron star emitting the radio waves. Okay, they're rotating neutron stars. So, Anthony Hewish was awarded a Nobel Prize in Physics, the first astronomer to do so. for this observation, for the discovery of the pulsar. The pulsar was huge in my life. I remember it being a moment in time where I thought it really was happening, that we really had finally received that communication, and it opened up, in my mind, it opened up a whole world of possibility. Another researcher who was very important to me was Dr. Helen Wambach. I've mentioned Dr. Wambach before. Helen Wambach, interestingly enough, she was a PhD, and she was the author of many books. She was initially motivated by a desire to debunk reincarnation. Beginning in the mid-1960s, Helen Wambach conducted a 10-year survey of past life recalls under hypnosis among 1,088 subjects. 2 of those subjects were my mom and me. She asked very specific questions about the time periods in which people lived and the clothing, footwear, utensils, money, housing, etc., which they used or came in contact with. Wambach concluded that people's recollections were amazingly accurate and wrote that fantasy and genetic memory could not account for the patterns that emerged in the results. With the exception of 11 subjects, hopefully not my mom and me, all descriptions of clothing, footwear, and utensils were consistent with historical records. I think this is very interesting. She did a scientific analysis on the past lives reported by her 10,000 plus volunteers, and here is some startling evidence. 50.6% of the past lives reported were male and 49.4% were female. This is exactly in accordance with biological fact. The number of people reporting upper class or comfortable lives was in exactly the same proportion to the estimates of historians of the class distribution of the period. The recall by subjects of clothing, footwear, type of food, and utensils used was better than that in popular history books. She found over and over again that her subjects knew better than most historians. When she went to obscure experts, her subjects were invariably correct. Her conclusion was, and I'll quote Helen here, "I don't believe in reincarnation, I know it." So if you're interested in some of the work that Helen Wambach was doing, of course to my mom and her friends, and for me this was enormous. Helen Wambach's research was very important to us. If you're interested in her works, she wrote the book Life Before Life. She wrote Reliving Past Lives, both published in 1978. The updated Reliving Past Lives, The Evidence Under Hypnosis, was published in 1984. Mass Dreams of the Future was published by Chet Snow in 1993 after her death, and it was based on her research. I've read that book too. It's a really interesting book. Follow up if you're interested. Now moving along to the future, to the present, I thought I would just give you a couple of people who have become important in my thinking as an adult. All of those helped to form my thinking as a child. All of them were very interesting and opened doors in my mind. As I became older, I started reading Carl Sagan. I really fell in love with science, and I am in love with science today, as anybody who watches this show knows. I read science avidly. Actually, I read it for a living, but I read it avidly for pleasure as well. Carl Sagan was a Cornell astronomer. He was a writer. I believe he was the greatest teacher of our time. And although he didn't believe in anything that he couldn't scientifically prove, nevertheless, he was so full of wonder that he opened doors in my mind. And he stirred my imagination, and I love Carl Sagan. I think he was just wonderful. He wrote lots of books. Again, all of them, he never believed in anything metaphysical and just debunked all of that and said, you know, it was just a bunch of baloney. But nevertheless, I found him very spiritually stimulating and fascinating. Today, I read Brian Greene, who writes about quantum physics. I'm also fascinated by cosmology, which is the study of the origin of the universe. And I think all of these studies, quantum physics, cosmology, astronomy, are really very spiritual aspects of science, and that you really have to embrace spirit on some level, whether you know it or not, or acknowledge it or not. in order to make these abstract leaps and intuitive deductions and so on that you must make in order to follow along with cosmology and quantum physics. So that's my 2 cents. So today I'm reading Brian Greene, Carl Sagan, and lots of other physicists, but those are the 2 I think are the best. I'm also very interested in Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist. I don't believe everything that they believe, so I could not call myself a Buddhist, but I am fascinated by some of their philosophies. I love their peaceful, lovely philosophy. I love to read the Dalai Lama's books. He's written many books, and I find he really touches my heart. His thoughts really touch my heart. So I hope I've given you a few ideas. These are a few people and a few events that have opened doors in my mind, that have piqued my curiosity, that have been markers along the way and sort of signposts on my path, my personal path. Maybe somebody somewhere in there would be, or one of these events or interests would open a door in your mind. So have a look for yourself if you're interested. All of these people and events are very easy to find on the internet. What has opened a door in your mind? What would you like to share with the greater community? Whose writings? What thoughts? What train of thought? Go to our website. I'm running the URL right here on the screen. Go to our website. It's the easiest thing in the world to contact us. It's just a couple of clicks of the mouse and you can contact us. I'd love to know what you're reading, who really is helpful to you spiritually, who you think has something to offer the greater community. And of course, there are so many others that I don't have time to mention, but there's so many others, but I just wanted to mention a few here today. Who animates you? Who excites you? Who gets you so excited that you can't sleep at night because they're just filling your head with ideas? Share your ideas with others. Write to me and we'll talk about it on the show. So keep reading, keep thinking, and thanks.
My husband and I have been going out there every year almost for the past 9 years or so. And before we went, we were just drawn to it for some reason. And we find it just magical and beautiful. It doesn't look anything like New England, which is where we are in Vermont. We grew up and lived in Massachusetts and then moved to Vermont in 1986. And so New England, has a lot of trees, and the changing of the seasons, and there's water and ocean. In New Mexico, there's no ocean, and I never really thought that I would fall in love with a place that doesn't have ocean or water. That's an element that's definitely missing from out there, but it's just so beautiful in such a different way. There are mesas and desert, and you wouldn't think that would be beautiful, but as you will see from the pictures that I'm showing, it really is. It's majestic and gorgeous. And the other thing about New Mexico is that so much of the land out there is unspoiled. There are no people living there. There are just, there are miles and miles of places where you can just ride through the desert and just, keep on looking at these amazing views of rock formations and plants. Because I remember driving out there and going around corners, and whichever one of us wasn't driving would be going, we take turns driving, would be going, oh my God, look at that. Oh, look at that. So it's just absolutely gorgeous. And the other thing that we both love about it, my husband Will and I, is that there's a real mixing of cultures out there, a real mixture of and blending of Native American, Hispanic, and Anglo cultures. So that's something that I really like, the diversity and the blending of all those cultures. So what we do usually is we fly to Albuquerque and then we rent a car, and our usual stay is 10 days to 2 weeks, and we end up putting a couple of thousand miles on the car. We go just all over the state. We go everywhere, and we have seen the cities out there, but some of our most of our really favorite places are the more out-of-the-way places, you know, the ancient ruins, and places out in the desert, and some of the small little ghost towns and small funky little towns that are being built up again. And the other thing is that there's really no humidity at all. It's really dry. There was one day that we were walking around and we thought it was just a gorgeous day, and people around us were talking about, oh, the humidity, oh, it's so humid today. And we were saying, what? And so we started talking to some people, and we said, you're saying that it's humid? And I think the humidity that day was like 40%. And I think, you know, we said to them, do you want to know what humid is? Come to New England where the temperature is like this, maybe in the 90s, but the humidity might be 78 or higher, or in the 80s. And so I guess everything is all relative. But that's one thing that I really love about it, because here in the summer, when it's really humid, I really don't like being outside, you know, from late morning until mid-afternoon when it's really hot. But out there, you know, I can be outside any time of day because the heat doesn't really bother me. It's the humidity. And the other thing about that too, just a silly thing, is that you can't have a bad hair day out there because there's no humidity to frizz your hair up. So anyway, let's. I guess I'm going to start off by talking about Albuquerque, the city of Albuquerque. Albuquerque is the largest city in New Mexico, although Santa Fe is actually the capital. And the first people to arrive in Albuquerque reportedly got there about 15,000 years ago, which is pretty amazing. So this is a very old area. The architecture out there is totally different from here. There's a lot of adobe buildings. You know, people think buildings are built out of adobe and often trimmed with turquoise. So a lot of the colors out there are beige and turquoise. So it looks really different. And one of our favorite places in Albuquerque is Old Town, and it's really, you know, a very pretty part of the city to walk around in Albuquerque. You know, really cool, funky stores and restaurants, and there are also mostly Native American people selling their wares, you know, their crafts, their jewelry in the marketplace. They're usually lined up on the sidewalk, and they usually have, you know, cloths with their jewelry or their crafts, you know, lined up. So that's usually the first place that we go after we arrive, because we're flying into Albuquerque. So that's usually where we go first. Santa Fe, that's a really beautiful city. It's actually gorgeous. The thing about Santa Fe, though, is that we found it to be a little bit yuppie-like, kind of built up, and it's very expensive. I mean, the jewelry in Santa Fe is really expensive. You really have to have money, you know, to be buying stuff there. But it is worth seeing. It's really gorgeous. And another thing that we both enjoy doing is going to Tesuque, which is probably just outside of Santa Fe, I would say. I'm not sure how many miles. And every weekend they have a huge, gigantic flea market, and they just have everything there. They have, you know, craftspeople, you know, who have made, you know, selling jewelry and things for the house, you know, very unusual things. And one thing that I usually get out there is, if you can see this, the cloth on the table, which is a sari or a cloth. I use them often for, I'm an astrologer and a tarot reader, so I use them to put it on a table when I'm doing readings, or sometimes to hang on the wall. You know, they're very decorative. But anyway, at Tesuque, they're really cheap. So when we go to the flea market, it's usually a day, and my husband is usually through looking there long before I am. So he usually ends up waiting around for me. So it's a really fun place to go if you are out there. And speaking, I think I mentioned before, you know, talking about funky little towns or little mining towns, and one of those is Madrid. It's spelled just like Madrid in Spain, but it's pronounced Madrid, and it actually was once a thriving coal mining town. And I guess for a while there it was pretty defunct. You know, it sort of died out, like sort of a ghost town, but now it's really coming back to life, and there are some really cool stores and you know, art places. It's a fun town to walk around. And also Abiquiu, is another small town, and that's actually where the place where Georgia O'Keeffe, the artist, finally ended up settling. She came to New Mexico in 1929 and really fell in love with it and spent a lot of time in Taos. And then Albuquerque is, there's not a whole lot there, but it has beautiful views. But the one thing that really is beautiful is the Dar al-Islam Mosque. And you can go way up to the top. It's on this huge, it's on the top of a mountain. And when you're up there, you can really see for miles, and it's really quiet and peaceful. It's just beautiful. It's absolutely a wonderful place. And then there is Bandelier National Monument. And this was inhabited in, starting in the late 1100s, rather, by Pueblo Indians. And they actually carved homes out of the cliffs. And they also dug kivas. And for those of you who don't know what that is, a kiva is usually as a round, kind of a round indentation in the earth that's dug into the earth and filled with, it usually has dirt on the sides and then clay around it. And some of them are about as big as this table, and some of them are huge, like as big as a room. And they were used, thousands of years ago for the people back then to do their spiritual, have their spiritual rituals or whatever they were doing back then, the kivas. And so at Bandelier today you can climb way up and you can see the ruins of these dwellings, which are really, really pretty amazing. It's quite something. And there's a lot of places there where you can also walk around. So it's a really neat place. And the other, I think, the best place to see ruins is Chaco Canyon, which is in northwestern New Mexico. And by 1000 AD, Chaco was actually at the center of culture and spirituality and work. And it was inhabited by the Anasazi Indians. And it's really big. You can, and the amazing thing about it is that these ruins were built in alignment with the sun and the moon. And so it's really pretty amazing. You can sort of like walk through it. And you'll see from these pictures that the doors are really low, so we had to bend to get through them. So it appears that the people back then were probably quite short, because most of the doors are really no higher than maybe, I would say maybe 4 feet. So I would say these were really, short people back then. But they lived in this place, and it's really big, and it's just really, there's a very strong feeling of the energy there, when you're standing there or walking around it. And there's a lot to see. It's really pretty big. And the Anasazis disappeared from there in around 1400. Nobody really knows why. I mean, there's some speculation that it may have been because of drought or famine, or maybe war, that they were running from another people. I mean, nobody really knows. That's really the bottom line. But it is a great place to go. It's really magical, the energy that's there. And also the Aztec ruins, which is similar in construction to Chaco. And that's kind of a U-shaped village on 2 acres. And that's, the ruins are smaller, but it's still a really neat place to go. It's the same kind of idea. Oh, and another neat thing is in the Farmington area, as you drive, Farmington is a town in New Mexico, as you drive to and from Farmington, there's a giant rock formation. It's actually the volcanic core of an extinct volcano. And it looks like it is a huge rock, but it's weird. As you drive around it, it almost looks like an apparition. And every time you drive around it, it changes before your eyes. It's really strange. It's kind of eerie, but it's really neat. The Navajos call it the rock with wings. And there are many tribal legends surrounding it. So that's a really neat drive to take, and it's just beautiful. Again, with the big sky country. I know that, I think it's either Wyoming or Montana that people refer to as big sky country. But in New Mexico, it really is too. Big sky, really big sky. And the sky is almost always blue. I think let's see, about 265 days a year it's sunny. It doesn't rain a whole lot there. So they do have some problems with, conserving water. But the weather there is just almost always really, really nice. There aren't too many weather-related issues like we have here in the winter. And then there's Gallup, which is one of the nation's foremost trading centers for Native American arts and crafts. And that's, kind of a small city with many, many, stores and places for people to buy and trade jewelry. So it's kind of fun to look around those stores. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, well, there's actually quite a few places. I wanted to mention the Red Rock area, which is not too far from Gallup. It's actually it's red. I mean, the soil and the mountains are actually a red color. It's again visually stunning and amazing. And every year they have what they call an intertribal ceremonial, and it's really a big event. I mean, they have vendors, selling art, selling jewelry, and crafts that they've made. They have all kinds of food, and they also have a place where people do, mostly Native Americans, or all Native Americans actually, do play music and do dancing, and the dancing is done often in full costume, as you can see here. And so it's really visually stunning to watch, and just amazing, the energy, when you watch it. So we've been to that, a couple of times, more than a couple of times, and so that's that's in August. So when we do go in August, we get to see that. So that's really gorgeous. And one place that we always go is, there are many pueblos out there and many Indian reservations, and as you're driving through New Mexico, there'll be signs, saying you're entering, the Navajo reservation, and then another sign when you're leaving. And if you do go to a pueblo, which is where Native Americans live and work, there are certain things that you need to observe, as far as their customs go. For example, many of them don't like you to take pictures. Sometimes some Native Americans believe that by taking a picture of someone that you're actually stealing part of their soul, and so you really have to respect their beliefs, and their rules, when you're on their reservation. And then some of them don't mind if you take pictures. I mean, sometimes you can, and some of them you can take pictures if you pay something, to bring your camera in. So it varies. So it's important to really be mindful of that. Anyway, the Zuni Pueblo is one of our favorite places to go because the Zunis are really known for their jewelry, and often the jewelry making is passed down from generation to generation, and they make just gorgeous stuff. And so we go there every year and spend way too much money on jewelry, but it's worth it. And here you can see some bolos. My husband collects these bolos, and you can see how beautiful they are and how intricate, and they're handmade, by the Zuni. So you can see all the craftsmanship and detail that went into making these. He probably has, God, he must have 10 of them by now. And you can see also a couple of bracelets that I've gotten, and I have more, but this is just a couple of them. You can see in them, too, the detail and everything, the detail that went into them, and how I can't even imagine being able to make something like that. I mean, I'm not very good with my hands, not very crafty that way, so it's hard for me to imagine being able to do that. So, so that's a really fun place to go. And not far from there is the El Mal Pais, which in English means Badlands. And it's actually a national park, but it's this really huge area that you can drive in, and there are places that you can, get out of your car and walk around. And we go there every single year because we kind of fell in love with this place, that there's almost never anyone there, or if there are, you might run into like 2 people. So when you go there, it's very private. You really kind of have it to yourself, and you can see from these pictures. There are canyons that you can look at that are just visually stunning, and the rock formations is something called Window Rock, which you can see here, and it's just beautiful, and it has a very magical feel to it. So that's El Malpais, or the Badlands. And that, again, that's our favorite place. We go there every year. We usually bring a picnic lunch, and sit down at one of the tables. There are picnic tables in some places, and have our lunch, and then we walk around and just kind of groove on it, because it's a great place. Another neat place is El Morro, and that is probably a 1.5 or a 2-mile walk around these rock formations, and there are Indian petroglyphs on it, and also messages from Spanish explorers and also from Anglo settlers who came in later. So it's really fun to walk around that and and just read all of the inscriptions in it. And at this point in time, now there's sort of a fence around it so that you can't reach it, so it can't be defaced. Unfortunately, there are people who would do that, but it's still really fun to walk around and to walk around the whole thing and to see those things. The other place is Acoma, which is also called Sky City, because it was occupied. It's been occupied since 1075, and now there are probably 13 families living there. So not too many, but you go up, very high, and you can sort of look down at the ruins, which gives you a whole different perspective on it, from like a kind of an aerial view, So that's really a lot of fun. Another place that we like is Silver City, and it's kind of I guess that was a mining town too, many years ago. And even though it's called a city, it's more like a big town than a city. And the downtown area is just really beautiful, and it has like really not chain stores, like individually owned businesses of all kinds, and it's just very pretty. And a lot of fun to walk around, and we really like it there. And there's a little town right outside of it called Pinos Altos, which is probably 5 miles outside of Silver City. Another cool place is the City of Rocks, which is southeast of Silver City, and it's just a whole huge place with ancient rock formations, and there are so many of them, and they're so different. You can see some of them here, and this doesn't even capture all of them. I mean, you could really spend a long time there, which we have, just looking at it and just appreciating the beauty. And in New Mexico, maybe you think of it as just being dry and desert and everything, but there are flowers there, and there are cottonwood trees. So there are places that do have trees and grass, so it's not just all brown, dried up desert. There's a lot more to it than that. Another amazing place that you can see here is White Sands, and it's really something because it looks like snow. The sand is just so white, but actually what that is fine granules of gypsum, but it looks like snow, and even when you're there, it does. I mean, it's just kind of amazing to be there. And we were there in the daytime, but I've heard at night that it looks really pretty eerie. If you're there at night, which we haven't yet. Oh, and one other thing I should definitely mention in talking about New Mexico is Roswell, which is the site of the International UFO Museum and Research Center, which is wonderful. The museum is dedicated to UFO phenomena because in 1947 there was a crash on a ranch which was northwest of Roswell, and the early reports which first came out said that there was a spaceship and 3 alien bodies. And then the military immediately jumped in and said, oh no, it's just a crashed weather balloon with no bodies in it. But, and I guess everyone has their own opinion about it. I personally believe that it was a government cover-up, and there have been I've read a lot about it, and I've watched programs on it where people have been interviewed and read the stuff in the museum. And people who were around back then, who are to me seem to be really, really credible people, talk about the fact that they were told, not to say anything. So I truly believe that there was a crash, of a UFO. And if you go into the museum, it's really what they have is a recreation of what the alien body was supposed to look like as it was described by people who saw it. And so when you see it, it looks real, so it's kind of like, wow. So it's really a fascinating place to go. You know, and it's big. It has a lot of things in it, and you can buy books there and postcards and just, you know, read a lot about it. There's a lot of reading material that you can read for free. And there's also, as you're driving into Roswell, there's a sign on the highway that says this is the site of the Roswell 1947 Roswell crash. So it's a really fun place to go. So I'm biased because I really love New Mexico. My husband and I hope to move out there someday. But I certainly recommend it as a trip to anybody, you know, who has any interest in it, to just, you know, go.